the second one is a guest presentation. Luciano, a quick background on that. Luciano works at IBM. He, not sure if he leads, but it works on the Elyra project. And in the past, we've had a chat about integration of Flyte and Elyra. So I'll let Luciano, explain how Elyra works, and then we can see as a community if there are volunteers who can help drive that project.
Hey guys, how are you? Let me share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Are you guys seeing the Git page with Elyra, or are you guys just trying to see if I'm sharing the right the right desktop? Okay, cool. So thanks guys for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here talking a little bit about Elyra. I also have a few folks from the team joining. It's good to get involved on the community. So I don't have anything like very structured prepared, but I would just go over a little bit of what Elyra is. I'll focus on the pipelines, which I think is an area we are talking about the integration, and feel free to interrupt and ask questions anytime. So we are located at github.com/Elyra-AI, Elyra. We also have a couple of other repos there that kind of like around Elyra, but all in that same organization. If you click on the documentation, I kind of like on the overview, you can see a little bit of like what kind of features that Elyra provides. One of the most popular feature is actually the pipeline editor, but we also bring a couple of other things to the Jupyter Lab development environment. We have added better support for Python and R, so you have a native Python and R script editor. You can do a lot of like things that you can do in a regular editor, like refactoring and autocomplete and things like that, leveraging the LSP integration that we added in the latest Elyra 2.0 release. But we also have the ability to execute those directly from the Jupyter Lab environment. You can execute locally, you can execute remotely, or you can run that as a kind of like a single node pipeline. We also, Elyra add code snippets to the play. Code snippets give you a bunch of like, well, the ability to store reusable codes, and you can later on quickly search and start inserting that whenever you're doing your code. Hybrid runtime support gives you the ability to execute things locally or externally. We leverage another project that we created at the Jupyter ecosystem called Jupyter Enterprise Gateway, which support remote kernels, remote executions. So that gives you very seamlessly integration, let's say, with cloud environments and others. I've talked about Python and R. For version control, we have integration with Git. Also, we have been contributing very heavily to the table of contents to make it very usable for large notebooks, but not only for that, we also, because of the script editors, we also integrated with the script editor. So if you have a large Python file, you can start navigating from there. And I talked about the LSP. So this is kind of like a high level things that we bring to Jupyter Lab on top of like all of the nice things that Jupyter Lab works. So when you open Jupyter Lab, what you will see is sort of like the regular Jupyter Lab interface, and you will see a section for Elyra here, which starts bringing all our our extensions. We have the pipelines, Python editor, our editor, and then we also on the left side here, you have things like the code snippet, runtime configuration, and things like that. When we talk about pipeline, we have the notion of like a generic pipeline. A generic pipeline basically are the set of components that can run in any runtimes. And we are working for the next release to also enable runtime specific components. That means if Kubeflow has a set of components that they support natively, we'll start exposing those as well. In prior to that, we basically were supporting notebooks and scripts. Now we're gonna have things like serve a model, train a model, manipulate some data, all those kind of that are natively exposed by the runtimes. Similarly, with the Apache Airflow runtime as well. And by the way, those two are the two runtimes that we support today. If we look into a pipeline, basically you have sort of like a multiple nodes. You can see the node properties. So you have a associated file in this case. During the runtime, this will run in a Docker image. You can select specific images, all of that kind of like all integrated here. You can associate resources such as CPU, GPU, RAM. As you're doing development locally and you will run that in a remote runtime, you can associate file dependencies. You can put specific files, or you can do like star.csv. You can include subdirectories. You can also associate environment variables if you want to, for some reason, customize the run with different values, and also collect output files. This is available when you go from different ones. And adding new ones, you have a palette that we are gonna expand here, but is as simple as just dragging and drop something here. Then you can go to the node properties and start filling, for example, some of the required properties there. And that's mostly what someone that is building a pipeline needs to take care of. You can see here, like when you hover, you can see some of the attributes. Double clicking goes to actually the artifact. And if you look into the specific notebook, it's a regular notebook. It's nothing. Basically, our idea here is the data scientists focus on building or working on the problem that they have in hand, and not necessarily having to understand requirements of a runtime or understand how to package or anything like that. That is going to be all abstracted by Elyra. And similarly, if you look into a Python script, is very simple Python script. Is just do whatever it needs to do, save into a CSV, and we do the rest. Similar thinking to R. It basically no runtime or no changes required to run here. And then when you run, so we have the run button here, or first we have these runtimes. This gives you sort of like the configuration to actually the runtimes that we pre-configured. That is when you click here, you'll have a local runtime that executes local. This is more like a mode. Or if you select the Apache Airflow, for example, you will see then what has been previously configured, similar to Kubeflow pipelines. And when you click OK, we will do all the packaging. We will sort of like, if you have dependencies, we'll put into object storage. and get the execution going there. Um, let me give you a quick, like just a local execution, local just gonna execute in my environment. And here, if I make it a little bit bigger, you can see that things are getting executed. And right after it's completed, we'll get the notification here that uh, excuse me, is done, completed, and then all the files, all outputs and stuff will be updated here. So that gives you a very quick, high-level functionality in terms of like what it's doing, things that are coming. So this is a VS Code. So we are also sort of like working on integration with VS Code. The idea is about the same. We are looking into places where you are building your models, you are working with scripts and stuff and needs to be integrated into a pipeline, and looking to enabling those to be integrated via Elyra. So in this case, I have the same pipeline that I have there. You have the same functionality. You can get your node properties and stuff like that. And we will then also enable you to execute the pipelines here or submit to an external runtime. This kind of like share the same editor. So we externalize the editor so that is usable in multiple locations. And with the next release that we are wrapping up, the palette here will now have much more components. So it's going to be even a richer development environment for building, training, deploying models in a kind of like environment that data scientists are used to work with. If you guys have questions, otherwise I can talk about a little bit of like the internals of like how the adding a new runtime sort of like works or requires.
Hey, thank you for that. Luciano, so definitely would love to understand how to integrate, but I had a couple questions. So one is you have the editor portion, but can you open up one of the Jupyter scripts that you had?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe not R. On a Python. My R is a little weak. Yeah, so this will be run as an entire script, and or maybe even if it's a Jupyter notebook, it has to be completely start to end runnable. Is that an expectation?
Yes, either node is run to completion. So if you have a Python script, we'll bootstrap a Python environment and run there. Similar, if you have a notebook, we execute, for example, using Papermill. So it's the same notebook environment that you would get from inside a notebook or Jupyter Lab instance. So it is a native environment that runs that, and we enable customizations. For example, if you need any specific thing, you can create a Docker image and use that for running that specific node.
Yeah, interesting that you guys are using Papermill. We have an integration with Papermill within Flyte, so I think that might make it easier to integrate. But how do you? So I also saw the inputs and outputs that you specified. They can only be files. Is that right? And can they be of any type, or they have to be CSV?
They can be any type of files. Basically, those are. So the idea is you're doing the development of your script locally. So you might have, for example, a CSV that you're reading, or some other auxiliated file, or in the case of notebooks, you might have imports from other Python files. And we need to make those available in the external runtimes. and those are kind of like the local dependencies. And then if you are generating files, generating things that needs to be propagated to different nodes, you can do that. Now, if you have data or a database or something being written somewhere, then you don't necessarily need to pass that. I think then it's more like you guys sharing that location or something like that, and it can go there. There is sort of like a data aspect, but currently we don't have anything specific to passing data from one node to another, particularly because we consider like a lot of these cases are going to be like big data or large things, and we are not sure the best way there, but it's something that we have on the back of our minds and have talked a little bit, but haven't done anything yet. I think
yeah, Luciano, so in that actually Flyte does the data passing and all of that for you, right?
Great.
I think yeah, we would love to. So how do we extend? What is what are the minimal set of things that you need to do? And what are the things are customizable? I think so. For example, the components is very interesting, at least to Flyte, and the other things that are interesting is we would love
yes.
to like actually get the inputs and outputs, like control the inputs and outputs, because that's where Flyte really shines. So is that possible to customize it so that we can pass custom inputs and outputs, and we can provide the files correctly in the right place so that the Elyra can take over?
Yes. So let me go back here. So the list of components, so let me step back. So we sort of have a processor which encapsulates the runtime sort of like interface. And that's the main area that someone would come and extend. We have the two examples, well, actually three examples. We have local, the KFP and Airflow, and what you need to do there currently basically two things, and that is being expanded for the next release. So the two things that we have there is process and export. So those basically allows you to process a given pipeline and then export a given pipeline. And when I say export is if you have the ability to generate some specific code that is to the runtime. So in the case, for example, KFP is using KFP DSL, for example, and things like that. We are adding two things, which is mostly related to the palette. We sort of like pushing down to the server the ability to give a list of components and give the properties for each component. So in that case, then the runtime can tell, oh, these are sort of like the additional components that I'm supporting. And then when you click on node properties for a given node, that same functionality will give the specific properties. So you can have a customized palette or properties for each of the nodes. So into that case, yes, you will be able to, let's say, have different ways of like, or like handling data or things that are specific to your set of components. And I think the requirement there is when process is called, then the runtimes know exactly what to do with those so that it executes properly. And then on the execution side, basically inside the runtime image, when things are getting executed, what we have today for both Kubeflow and Airflow is a driver script that basically bootstrap the execution. I'm assuming we will have something similar to Flyte, but then these are things that are much more specific to a runtime and might differ as well.
Awesome.
that gives you a very high level of things. Oh, one thing that I forgot, we are also sort of like for the specific components, the actual processor, the runtime implementation can provide a parser so that it knows how to parse the component files. Like KFP uses YAML, Airflow uses JSON. I don't know how you guys are doing in Flyte, but then you basically provide a parser that gives you a sort of like a value object of that component that then the runtime can pass out.
Awesome. Yeah. We would, I think there's definitely some possibilities of integration here. And it might look a little different from the other two because it might be richer. Because we do have more data than the other two integrations, but that'll be, we can, if you guys are open to it, we would love to explore that.
The richer the better, and we are really open. I think we are really eager to have additional runtimes. We'll definitely collaborate and help as we can. And it'll be also good for us to start getting a little bit of like insights on how Flyte works, and same you guys on Elyra and Jupyter Lab in general. So I think it's a good area for us to collaborate.
Yeah, you like, if you guys have a community sync, I think somebody from our community would love to join and talk about Flyte, and then I think we will come up with an idea of how we think we can integrate, at least what we would like to integrate with, and then we can go from there, if that's okay.
Oh, definitely. And I think we already even have, we already have an issue for Flyte integration.
Oh yeah, I actually made this issue a long time ago.
Yeah, so I think we discussed a couple of things there. We can kind of like get from where we left, or and then in terms of community, we talk on Gitter. We also have these weekly meetings on Thursdays, 9 a.m., which basically it's at the bottom of the README here. How to join that, and other than that, I think just hop on that issue or some other issue, and we can start working together. If we need some ad hoc discussions or something to get things started easier, just let us know. We'll help in any way that we can.
Sure.
And I think in terms of benefits for your community, I think being able to attract more data scientists where they can actually visually start building their pipelines, not have to care about kind of like some of the DevOps tasks related to a runtime, might give you a lot more a better user experience in terms of like building the pipelines and integrating with the runtime. You also gonna start getting kind of like the different editors that we start supporting. So in this case, Jupyter Lab, soon the VS Code as well, and then so that I think it's gonna be another interesting user experience and value for the users that are building the pipelines.
Any questions from anybody?
Don't be shy, guys. We have the whole team here if we need something specific.
I've got a question. This is Kevin. I'm with the Elyra team. Katan, you had mentioned that one of the things that Flyte shines about is the inputs and outputs handling, and that you'd like to control that. And we're in the process of designing this third-party integration facility, and I'd like to better understand how Flyte would like to control that. And are your pieces termed as components like cube flows are, or what's the terminology that you would use for something like that?
Yeah, we call it the DAG a workflow because it's more than a DAG oftentimes. Each node in the graph is a node, in the workflow is a node, but each execution unit is called a task. And the task has multiple task types, which can be, the similarity to components. It's just that the task types are richer because you don't really think about a YAML or something, but you can actually, write Python code or Java code or anything, and that gets converted to the task runtime. And the way we do the specification is in protobuf, but of course you can do it in YAML and JSON, convert it to protobuf. So that's the thing. What essentially starts happening is you never really specify the DAG as a set of dependencies between nodes. You specify a producer-consumer relationship. You say that in the graph that I can see in the presented screen by Luciano, for example, if factorial.r would produce a number and the generate statistics would consume that number, that would automatically create that link between those two nodes. Now in the UI, you could, you may want to create that link by drawing the bits, but what you're connecting is essentially you're connecting the output of a node to the input of a node. Does that answer?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And that becomes the flow of the data. Essentially, you're modeling the flow of the data, not modeling the order of task executions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and then at runtime we do have various hooks for like things like papermill to be started. Like you can start an IPy kernel, you could actually run a Java process, or you could run a distributed Spark process, and those are just hooks within a container. So, and we do have two runtimes. One is in Java and one is in Python. But we also have the engine that's actually passing the data correctly to all of them.
Yeah, I think from what you're talking, it's more like a data sort of like pipeline. I think that will be very interesting. I think what we have in our roadmap for after finishing the additional the runtime specific component is actually to work on data stuff. We want to do a lot more support for doing data integration directly with like a SQL editor, with reading a lot more around that area. And I think it will get even more synergy with Flyte. So very interesting, very good timing as well.
Yeah, like I think exactly what you said. So you could write a SQL as instead of the r.factorial, for example, you could write a SQL in Flyte today, and the SQL is run, let's say, on Snowflake, Redshift, whatever, and the data from there is passed to a Python script, and so that's what is supported today, and all of that is available through gRPC REST API, and so you can create a full layer on top of Flyte essentially that allows you to do those things.
Yeah, I think Flyte is probably at the same level as we were seeing with others. I think the functionality, the runtime, and a lot of like very exciting functionality or features are there, but using that requires a lot of like DevOps skills. And I think Elyra, one of the goals here is to simplify, starts bringing together these capabilities into an editor, an IDE that enables the data scientists to focus on the problem and forget about those, and we do the magic for integration. So I think it's gonna be very interesting if we can get that going.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah, looking forward to it. Any other questions from anybody? Because we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions, guys. I think this is something that will be helpful. But if it's, I mean, if you have doubts or anything, I mean, either now or later on, feel free to come and ask questions for us.
So I have a small, just a quick question, back to the outputs thing. So you mentioned that the outputs and stuff and inputs, or you asked if they were limited to just files. I'm wondering, you're able to, I'm assuming that means Flyte's able to pass like essentially parameters directly to the next node, not just files. Is that to support, I guess, anything specific? Because we've been trying to add, or we're planning on adding like hyperparameterization support for Qflow and stuff later on in Elyra. So I'm just wondering, is that something you guys are doing when you're passing parameters like that, or is it for some other scenario?
No, that's exactly like it could be. It's not just for ML, right? In your pipelines, you may have data besides a large file, which is meta information like hyperparameters or like a learning rate, for example, in many cases, right? And we want to model that correctly. And sometimes that itself could be an output of a previous step. And so that is passed in directly between the flows. So at a task level, though, it looks like as if it's a file output, because Flyte doesn't really deal with large amounts of data within the engine. The engine is just like, even Max said, we are basically shuffling pointers to data sets. And the data set is actually handled down in the larger, like either in one of the big cloud data stores like GCS, S3, etc., or it could be a big data warehouse, right? And what we are doing is we're shuffling pointers between the various steps. So the overhead of passing data between steps is minimized.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so like integer or a file is the same thing, right? An integer is one number, a file is a set of string or a string, essentially, with some meta information with it.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool.
So based on what we discussed, I know you mentioned about the inputs and outputs, but do you see other areas that might need to be tweaked that you foresee or not necessarily?
It's too early for me to comment, I would say.
Okay.
But yeah, if I could comment right now, it would be like I would rather do the implementation. But I would think that as long as you guys are open to like changing a couple things, and as we can work together to evolve the system, which I completely understand, right? You have other things as well, and we definitely don't want to break all of that. But if you could, modify a couple things, we could probably build a much more powerful workflow system within Elyra's UI. So like model the data flow itself. And that, because we have a compiler, so let's say, for example, R factorial generates an integer while generate statistics takes a string, Flyte compiler will fail before runtime. That will just say like, no, that doesn't work correctly because the types are incorrect. So we could actually start modeling and showing errors like that ahead of time, even before running.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have been talking about adding much more pluggability and customization things. One thing that we discussed but we haven't implemented yet is the ability for the runtime to sort of like specify or give hints of the different functionality that it provides, so then we can morph the UI if we are with one runtime versus another. So all of those things, I think, are things that we have discussed, but I think we don't have a concrete implementation that requires that yet. So, but Flyte might start becoming one of those. So let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect. If you guys don't have questions, thank you.